won't try to keep you too long. I want to welcome everyone here tonight. My name is Kara Bielog. I'm with the Shasta Valley Resource Conservation District. I want to welcome you to this presentation. We're going to have our first fall workshop of the year. Our spring session ended and now we're into fall. And tonight we're going to be discussing a fascinating project that's ongoing in the Sugar Creek watershed on the Klamath National Forest, and the science behind it that's getting us to rethink forests and their role in the water balance. The Siskiyou Forest Stewardship Workshops are hosted and sponsored by the Shasta Valley Resource Conservation District with support from the Siskiyou Land Trust and the Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's a monthly series of talks that we put on, bringing local and regional experts to the area on various topics in forestry to our communities to help us make decisions, informed decisions about the way we want to manage our forests. We've hosted topics ranging from community forestry to meadow restoration to defensible space to prescribed fire. And videos of this current workshop as well as past and future workshops can be found on our website at www.svrcd.org under the Rainbow Ridge category. I also want to invite you to sign up on our mailing list if you're interested in these workshops and you want to know about the future workshops. I promise I won't spam you beyond the workshops, so just go ahead if you want and sign up. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over then to Dan and Ray, who are going to be our presenters tonight. Dan Blessing is the Natural Resource Officer with the Klamath National Forest. He's worked on the Klamath for 37 years in fuels, fire, timber, reforestation, and botany. Certified silviculturist, and he likes to fly fish, especially in Russia lakes.
Wilderness.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. and Ray Haupt is a retired district ranger with the U.S. Forest Service and a California registered professional forester who until recently taught courses in forest ecology at the College of the Siskiyous. He's currently the District 1 Supervisor-elect. Five? Sorry. With the One or five, one of those. Under the Siskiyou County Board of Supervisors, in addition to serving as the research director of the Scott River Water Yield Enhancement Study, which is what this project is. I'm going to turn it over.
Hey, awesome. So just a couple more housekeeping things. There is, sorry about having to knock, at the door here, but we didn't want to leave it open with all the smoke out there. So hopefully that's not too distracting as people kind of come in. There is a restroom right through that door. There's some out in the hall, either left or right through there. But that's kind of the easiest one to find. So thanks for everyone for coming here. It's get the forester to talk about water, so there's probably about half the people in this room that know a lot more about water and water balance than me. But we've sponsored this, and so I was kind of elected to do this. So Robbie's in the front here to keep me honest. She's a hydrologist, so we'll get started with the presentation. The other part of that, I'll go through, just talk about, do the slideshow, and then we can kind of hold the questions till the end so that we can kind of get through this in a reasonable amount of time, all right? So, that's our question. There's a lot of folks that have asked us, can you manage the forest to increase water yield? Obviously, water is a big issue in this area, as it is throughout the West, and so, there's been a lot that's happened, to try to make the little water that we have go a little bit farther. And, some folks suggested that the Klamath National Forest should have a part in that, and we haven't done anything for water yield at all here on the forest. So, when the question was asked, Patty Grantham said, well, we would participate in a study if we had some partners to go ahead and do that. So we got with some partners, and we're looking at this study, and we've help fund some of that. So Kara gave me this list of questions up here that she would like me to answer. Why is this an important topic for the Klamath National Forest? So I kind of went over that. And why was Sugar Creek selected as a study location? Have there been other questions that address this question? explain water balance, what's the current status of the project, and how might the study change if fire affects the area. That's like amazing. She asked this question like a month ago, and I don't know. Check and make sure she doesn't have these psychic powers. Okay, so why the Sugar Creek watershed? It's within the Scott River water drainage. There are some overstock stands, especially on the National Forest lands, and that's the west side forest type, without a recent large fire history in that area. Like I mentioned, we had some partners support for that project in that area. We have a couple of projects that are going on right now in there. There's the Sugar Creek Watershed Improvement Project. We just signed a decision on that recently, to address a lot of things, legacy sites and stuff like that. And we also have this Sugar Creek Research Natural Area up in the headwaters in the wilderness area. And we've created this management strategy, and it's, I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more too. And then we also felt like we had an option to do a paired watershed study. In other words, do treatments in one watershed and not maybe in the other, and see if there's any effect. So really test this if that makes sense. So first, just talk real quickly about the Research Natural Area Management Strategy. Knows that the new ranger for Scott Salmon is here, so this is new stuff for you too. You can learn about this. The idea was, we've got this incredible biodiversity in that area, and that's what that Research Natural Area was set up to enhance forest species and resiliency within, the constraints of the Wilderness Act, what we can do up in that area. So we put that management strategy together, and here's a list of the conifers that are found in that area. So it's actually the most diverse number of conifers within one small area in the world that's been identified. It was 13 for a while, but the last couple of years ago they found it was 17 for a while, they found the 18th just recently. So it still is the most diverse assemblage of conifers in the world. So that's a pretty cool thing, and we want to protect that and enhance that. And this is part of, the implementation strategy there. We still have to do NEPA if we do anything, but, I highlighted this one part here for us. It's looking into partnerships for successful management of research and education about that Sugar Creek watershed. Okay? So, another question. Have there been other studies that have addressed this questions of, watershed in the area? So, there's some studies that have looked at low flows in the Scott River, effects of forest thinning on water yield, climatic effects of water and water balance and yield, and water storage. So those are the types of studies that have already gone ahead of us. So, obviously we don't want to duplicate work that's already gone ahead of us, but just build on that. So a lot of these, many folks have seen a lot of these studies here, but this one by Dan Drake and Ken Tate, it says our analysis shows that downward trends in fall flows appears to be explained by a decrease of water content of snow falling on the Scott River watershed. So that was one of their primary findings there. And then this was the one that came after that. It said, well, according to their numbers, that 39% of the decline in water was due to, those climatic factors, warmer climate, less snow, that type of deal. But then there was also a lot that they attributed to pumping of water in the basin. This one was kind of strange. It said now the carbon dioxide concentrations are rising. The trees are going to be more efficient and they're not going to use as much water. So you know, that just by having more CO2 in the atmosphere, it's going to increase that and reduce the amount of water that trees use, just, you know, without having anybody do anything. So this one, it's done by Roger Bales and John Battles, and this is kind of a similar study to the one that we're proposing here, and this is done in the Sierra Nevada. And it says, you know, that one of their findings is upstream management of the forest in the Sierra Nevada can significantly increase the value of downstream water resources by shifting water towards higher value uses and optimizing timing of the runoff. So that's their finding. And this one of the people doing that study, that did that study, is also participating in this study here. And this one talks about juniper removal in the Klamath River Basin, and it says, you know, basically, you know, if you were to remove a lot of juniper, you know, throughout the Klamath Basin, and then measure the flows, you know, down near Orleans or something, you probably wouldn't notice that much difference in flows. But what you might notice is that, you know, some increased summer flow rates and small tributaries and springs and wetlands across the basin. So it's you know, it's more localized, maybe not, you know, all across the basin. But, you know, most of these are just based on, you know, looking at literature and kind of, you know, people's best guess, that kind of deal. So this was a Scott River Flow Augmentation Study, Department of Water Resources, 1991. And it looked at, you know, water conservation, water transfers, and water development. And, you know, primarily they focused on water development as being the primary thing that could help, and that's, you know, providing as much as 20,000 acre-feet of water annually for stream flow augmentation. So, you know, these are, you know, and then like more small localized studies, similar thing, you know, storing water, but, you know, using beaver dams to recharge streams and stuff like that. So it's similar idea, but not at the, you know, not creating just one huge reservoir, but a lot smaller holding areas throughout the area. So that's kind of, you know, a quick overview of some of the studies that have been done. And we, like I said, we didn't want to repeat any of those. What we're really looking at is, you know, localized in this area, can forest management actually show any advantage? So we got the Scott River Cooperative Restoration Planning Group. We got several of folks that are, you know, like Larry, Bruce here have participated kind of in this whole thing. In fact, the money that we provided has gone through Larry's group to, you know, get these studies kicked off. So that's that question that I mentioned earlier. The public's requesting that forest treatments be designed to simultaneously restore stream flows for salmon, reduce the threat of high severity wildfires, and produce commercial timber products. That's sort of the baseline that we're functioning off of. And next thing, real quick here, we're going to talk about water balance. And what this is Quartz Hill looking down into the valley, and the idea is, this is 1935 and 1992, you know, that this is a much more open situation than this, and so, you know, by having forests, you know, get a lot more denser, that potentially, you know, we've decreased the amount of water available, you know, to the rivers. So just to talk a little bit about water balance, and this is where you have to keep me honest here. Okay, so, you know, you have, of all the water that falls on a piece of ground, you know, some of it goes up, evapotranspiration, so that's the evaporation off of the surface and stuff, or the surface of the trees, and the transpiration, that's, you know, what's being used for plants to respire. You know, they need moisture, just like we do. You know, for us to breathe, we need that, and we use moisture. They do the same. So that's the stuff that goes up. Then there's the runoff and groundwater recharge for water that's stored in the surface, in the soil surface and stuff. So that's sort of the water balance, you know, quick and dirty, right? So this is some of the terminology, you know, interception, that stuff that's like snow can be intercepted by the canopy, can sit in the canopy and then be lost right back to the air by sublimation. So that's moisture going directly from snow to vapor. So that's just, and then through fall, that stuff that goes through those canopies and is available to the ground. So real quick here, I hope this follows, but you know, when you talk about reducing transpiration and the whole storage idea in soil, I just thought of the this glass mountain scenario. So this is not what we're looking at. We're not looking at taking like all the vegetation off the surface, except for one little tree up here, and letting all the water run through the system immediately. You know, not a lot of water storage happening out in Glass Mountain. It all moves through. If this is the case, you wouldn't have, you know, really any evapotranspiration happening. It would be all moving through the surface, and it would not have any storage also. So it would go the system really quick, and it would be lost to the system. So what we're talking about here is trying to raise the base flows. So that at the time that, you know, late in the summer, this time of the year, we want to have water available. Okay, so that's the tricky part of this. So it's not just, you know, getting rid of all those pesky trees on the hillside and having the water available, because it's going to move through the system real quick and be gone by this time of year. So we need to be thinking a little bit bigger picture. And so that's the idea, increasing base flow, critical times a year. So to do that, we're going to look at increasing the water storage during the wet periods. So that around here is during the winter. And then decreasing the water loss to the system during the dry periods. So it's, you know, it's a water balance, but it's not a real simple water balance. You know? Increasing water storage. So we need to look at that snow and rain mix, the soil and groundwater storage, and then also look at the streams, how they function, and any impoundments, anything that slows the water down through the system. So snow and rain, you know, what do we have an effect on and what don't we have an effect on? Well, first of all, we don't have an effect on weather, really. You know, maybe some of these fires might change the weather a little bit here. But, you know, that rain and snow mix is kind of hard for us to have an effect on that, or what the air temperature is, or how much sunlight falls on the area, you know, during a period of the year time. But what we might have a potential effect on is how much of that snow and rain is intercepted by the canopy, how much ground shading we have. So once the snow gets on the ground, how much, you know, it's shaded. And then thermal regulation. And what I'm talking about here is that in general, you know, if you're back, you know, back in these trees here, it keeps the heat in just like a cloudy night, you know. And so there's a little bit more heat at night out in that area, more heat in the day in this area. So how that factors, you know, through the seasons, you know, we do have some effect on that. So the next thing is soil and groundwater storage. So we don't have any effect on geology, although maybe, Angie, do you think?
I've tried.
Can you try? All right. So, or soil types. So we don't have any effect on that. But, you know, what we might have a potential effect on is that through fall, how much rain, snow, you know, gets through the canopies. how much percolates into the soil, through the soil, what the soil structure is, is it compacted soil structure, or is it, open, loose with organic material? And then we also have an effect on any removals, such as pumping from, groundwater sources. So decreasing water loss through transpiration. So the idea here is, you decrease the weight area of the biomass, and you have less pumps, pumping stuff through there. And, this idea here, reduce evapotranspiration is conversion to low water use vegetation, would increase the runoff, the groundwater recharge, and soil water storage. And so we need to think of, the timing, when it's important, to have, well, when it's more important, less important to have, the vegetation out there transpiring. So we know that in the fall, once we get, a couple of hard frosts, we lose the hardwoods and we see the streams come up, usually at that point. So does that matter though, at that point? Are we already past that time where we really need the water? So we need to think about that, when plants are respiring and what kind of plants, and things like grasses that cure out real early in the season, how that factors into this whole equation. So, but I'm still good. Sort of on thin ice, maybe. And also streams and impoundments. We really don't have any effect on the gradient of the stream for the most part, but we can have potential effects. We can put in dams. We might put woody debris in the streams to, slow the water down moving through the system. We might put diversions in, or we might do some sort of stream bed restoration. So those are the type of ideas that we might have to do. So what's been done to date? So far, like I said, we put together an agreement to complete a study by the partners. We provided funds, like I said, to NCRC to fund the phase 1 of the study, and we have that document right now. NCRC contracted with Roger Bales and Rob York to provide that report on the potential to increase water yield. That's just, is there any potential at all? And Ray's going to talk about that. We've provided the remote sensing layers, the timber types, veg types. We've contracted to put a LiDAR flights in out there, and what a LiDAR flight is it's sort of a radar thing where they take a picture of the ground, and you can actually capture a lot of the vegetation during that, and so it's a way of sort of, looking at how much vegetation is out there, and then what it looks like under the vegetation, so what the actual ground looks like. And also Humboldt State is reestablishing veg plots in the upper watershed, and what we had was Sawyer and Thornburg put plots in there in the late 60s, and so we have folks going out there right now, well, not right now because it's illegal to go out there, but before the fires hit, they were going out there, they were putting, reestablishing these plots, so seeing how the vegetation has changed over that 40, 50-year period or so. And this is the phase 1 report finding just in general. It says catchment space suggests that the Klamath conifer forest has ecological attributes with a high potential for water yield gains. That's, like I said, Ray's going to talk a little bit more about that. And then the last question, this gets a lot of speculation. Obviously, if we do have a large fire in Sugar Creek, it's going to make it depends upon, I guess, where we are in the study. if we were to go forward and actually, take some baseline data, both in Sugar Creek and potentially, parent watershed, it could be, French Creek or South Fork or the Scott or something like that. If we had all that information and then you had a fire, then you might be able to learn something about that just from finding out what the difference in vegetation was after the fire compared to the pre-fire. So kind of depends upon when, that potential fire happens. So we're going to go ahead and let Ray talk and then questions afterwards, all right?
Well, if I were right now, I'd be packing my bags, we'd have to pick another watershed. I'm going to try and whip through a PowerPoint that usually takes me about an hour. And we'll try and do it in about a half an hour here. Basically, the Sugar Creek research study, I'm going to touch on a couple of things that Dan talked about too. And when I speak about the things that we see in the forest, keep in mind I'm speaking generically. And the reason I have to say that is because that the forest is very variable and one size does not fit all. So it depends whether you're on a north slope in true fir, on a south slope in pine, what elevation you're at. All these things that I'm going to talk about are relative, but they will be modeled differently in the model that we're going to take a look at. Okay, so the partner members, Dan mentioned I'm the project coordinator. You heard the term herding cats. You ever tried to herd researchers? I used to have this picture in my mind that researchers had these well-disciplined minds and they were easy to work with. Not so. Learned that pretty quick. So my role is basically to keep this group moving forward and to do the inspection of the research that comes in as part of the process before it's paid for, both by the county board that puts some money into the project and the Forest Service. And then of course Larry's group, the Northern California Resource Center right here, is keeping us straight legally because there's a lot of bells and whistles with administrative work associated with grants, and Larry's group is doing the administrative support there on that. UC Berkeley involved 2 PhDs. John Battles, who started early on, he'll provide some work later on, but Rob York is the vegetation expert, Dr. York, on this particular project. I'll talk about him and some of his work here in a little bit. UC Merced is involved, Roger Bales, PhD in hydrology, and Roger has done a similar project in the Sierra Nevada, which I'll also I'll show you some of the results in that. And keep in mind, it is in California, but it is different than us too. The Forest Service, again, a funding partner, but besides the funding partner, they're providing technical GIS support, and they know where some of the treasure's buried, and they're digging that out for us as we ask questions. And so there's a direct relationship between the researchers and the Forest Service. I went before the county board and made a presentation, and mainly because of the connection and the impact that this could potentially have on the water issues we have with ag here in Siskiyou County. So the county board put some seed money into this initial phase as well, so they're partners. Timbervest is the predominant private partner, private landowner in there. It used to be Fruit Growers Land Company, but Timbervest is the landholder now. And Timbervest is in there from the standpoint that when we get to phase 3 and 4 and start to do the implementation phase, most of that's going to be on private land and not on public because of legal encumbrances and wilderness and those kinds of things that are going to hamper what we might be able to do on private land to do some of this modeling. Fruit Grower Supply Company historically has the vegetative data dating back into the 50s on that land base, and they're there to provide whatever they can bring to the table. Study goals, Dan talked about these a little bit, to provide information to support evaluation of the potential that would enhance water supplies and moderate stand replacing wildfire in the Scott River. Ever so true today, Part of this is some of you knew me in my former role and knew that it was hard to keep me out of a helicopter. I spent a lot of time looking at vegetation on the west side of this forest and looking at changes from a forester's eye from the air. All the while I was supposed to be looking at fire, but I was really looking at the vegetation and reading what had happened on the landscape. Why did I want to know that? Well, when I first got here, I visited one of the old patriarchs of Scott Valley. That was Frank Hayden. And in Frank Hayden's living room, he has a picture. It's an 1890 lithograph of Marble Valley. And I just happened, before I saw that picture, to be on the ground the week before, and I could not believe the difference I saw between those two pictures. So that sparked my interest in '98 to start looking at what is going on this landscape here on the Klamath. So some of the motivating questions we have is past forest management caused a reduction in stream flow? We don't know. Yeah, will fuels treatments used to reduce the threat of wildfire restore and maintain in-stream flows? They may. Can we restore projects, maintain stream flow while meeting standards for other uses? I think so, if we use science and politics on some of this. Can the vegetation treatments provide a supply of commercial timber? That's most definitely, because of what you'll see here in a minute. This is where Sugar Creek is located in the Scott River Basin. The Scott River Basin here, Scott River watershed. And you know, while I was ranger for a period of 12 years, I used to listen to the Watershed Council complain about, what do they complain about? The use of water. No one would ever look at do a limiting factors analysis to understand the watershed and how it functioned, to understand what the capacity of the watershed was. And that's what sparked my passion with this as well. If you look at the Scott River Basin right here, comes down around towards Scott Barton into the Klamath, you'll notice the high country, rock and snow up here that's key to our hydrologic balance throughout the season. And then honing in on Sugar Creek itself, has a transition from lowland stuff right here near Callahan. A lot of it's non-commercial timber site, but it's important deer winter range, transitioning all the way up to bare rock at the head of the drainage there. So we have the full gamut, both north, south, east aspects, and the full elevational differences that represent the rest of the water basin. And that's key to the watershed study as well. But pre-fire suppression regimes, fires were a combination of low and moderate severity, and this comes from research. This just isn't me putting fancy slides up here. The high pyrodiversity led to high structural diversity. Structure, I'm talking about forest structure. You know, was it all up here? Was it all down here? Was it like this? You know, was it scattered? Was it a mosaic? And fire played a big role in that. What you'll see in openings, 1994 here, and 1985 is we're moving that way with smaller and smaller gaps in the forest. Pre-suppression structure and composition from Dunning and Knapp's research in the Central Sierra. Then we had low densities, we had heterogeneous with distinct canopy gaps between trees. We had continuous regeneration or recruitment of ponderosa pine within those gaps, and water efficiency, snow storage in the gaps, and led to an increased infiltration due to lower evapotranspiration in general across the landscape. Those gaps provided natural fire behavior modification as well. And what we're seeing from some of the research I'll show you here in a minute is about somewhere between 20 to 25% of all the land within a given sub-watershed was in early seral. It either recovering from a fire, or it was a brush field or rock or something like that. And that's key to how watershed function around here. So now what we see is a high density, especially in small and medium-sized classes. Part of that's due to the harvesting that took place in the 70s and 80s. Piece of it is because all that stuff died, and we're dealing with second growth now much higher stem densities. And then we have this homogeneous, contiguous overlapping sand layer, one layer on top of another, that historically wasn't there, except in, I'm speaking in generalities again, okay? The continuous regeneration and recruitment of white fur is known as the great furification to some researchers of the 20th century, and that's largely a component of fire suppression. Dramatic increases in water inefficient leaf area as well. So with this furification piece, there comes a 3- and 4-fold increase in water consumption. Because true fir is a water hog. It grows in deep shade at very high densities and really consumes water. And with the presence of fire, that would not be in our stands where it is today. So, what are the implications? Some recurring questions. What will be the water yield with climate warming if the snowpack continues to decline? I don't know that answer yet, but we'll be able to model it. What was the historical water yield prior to fire suppression? How different were forests prior to fire suppression versus today? You know, in the Siskiyous, you have 8,000 years of Native American burning backed up with later by range burning around here, and then a short period of forest management, and now full suppression and not much management. So it doesn't take long for a forest that's growing 400,000 to 600,000 board feet per year to build biomass in a hurry. Can or should we take forests back to pre-suppression conditions? I'm not going to answer that question. That's a societal question. I'll certainly push on it because I think we're seeing great dysfunction in the landscape. And then this is just a view, Dan was showing you, this is a view from Doozle Rock, which is on the east side of Scott Valley, showing in 1930, and a current picture. And the forest density is most obvious here in the foreground and the change associated with that. Knowledge gaps, lack of quantitative information across different California mixed conifer forests. We know a lot of things about some areas. We don't know much about anything here in Siskiyou County, to tell you the truth. From a research standpoint, we know a lot of things, but don't get me wrong. But we don't have a lot of research localized here in Siskiyou County that tells us exactly how things function. And I listen to old timers, but you know, we have pictures without the statistical scientific analysis, and I listen to all kinds of old timers tell me about how things were and everything else, but you know, truthfully, pictures tell a story, but in science it's just simply a story. And unfortunately in court it's a story too for the agency. So we want to get past that. So is there ecological dysfunction, changed hydrology? Well, this is a look toward Sugar Creek from Bolivar Lookout, 1930. And this is present. A bit of a change. Okay. You wonder why the fires are burning the way they are right now? It's not rocket science, but it is science. Forest management. Vegetation removal greatly results in more runoff initially, but then it regrows. So the challenge here is, how many times do you have to do it, you know, to get an increase in water yield? Vegetation regrowth means less runoff. For us, locally, it's about 10 to 15 years. Boy, isn't that an interesting figure, because 15 years is our fire reentry period. Maybe we should learn something from that. Clear cutting or high intensity wildfire means more sublimation and an earlier snow melt. Well, what's that do? That depresses stream flow late in the year. Okay. Not a good way to go, not big openings. Less dense forests up to a point in landscape position specific can retain snow longer. Dan talked a little bit about the complexity of the model that we run. The complexity is in the fact that we're doing an energy balance equation as well, where we take all of the snow that falls and all of the rain that falls at the different elevations and aspects, and then we apply the solar radiation to it and figure out what the sun's drying power is, as well as the re-radiation from the trees back on the snow and how quickly that melts snow throughout the year. And that's key to understanding the timing issue associated with hydrology in these watersheds. Colder snow-dominated areas produce more runoff than the lower ones, and the lower ones tend to be rain-dominated. This one in particular is what's most noticeable from the air, is the loss of just open space at the highest elevations. It's encroached with fir and brush. And if you ever try and, if you take a Brillo pad and try and push it down, it springs right back, right? Same thing's going to happen with snow too, that falls on those brush fields up there. So fire was good at maintaining those historically. Real question is, how much can we change and how much will it yield? I don't know. That's what the study's about. I can't tell you. But I can tell you from similar studies, there's a chart right here, locally about 30 inches in the Scott Valley, on the forested side, not on the east side, but on the forested side, is somewhere between these two charts. And you can see that the preponderance of the water that does fall ends up in evapotranspiration, the yellow. Very little of it actually ends up being sublimated and going into groundwater. That's key, and that's key to why we're trying to do this study here, because of all the watershed studies that have been done in the world, very few have actually been done in Mediterranean climates that we have. And in Mediterranean climates, as you can see, vegetation with this ET part and groundwater are in a real critical balance. And if you tip that balance one way or another, you lose your groundwater quickly. And of course, groundwater, besides the domestic uses, is what keeps our streams flowing longer in the year. This is a restored forest. Dan said we're not going to cut every tree. No, we're not. It's going to look like this, where you can look in the background and see all the true fir in the background. This is part of the Bales study in the Sierra Nevada, and it's a restored piece of woodland where they've cut the true fir out of it, and put it back to what it was 50, 60 years ago. Thinning from below is really what this is to a forest. If you look at this chart right here, what it shows you is with elevation change from 0 to 10,000 feet, it shows the sweet spot for mixed conifer is right in here for growth, but it's also the rain on snow zone where you get the highest densities of growth and the highest evapotranspiration. So if we can target that piece is significant as well. The stuff, once you get over the 10,000 foot, we don't have any of that. Once you get over 7,500 feet for us, there's diminishing returns on this end, and diminishing returns below 2,500 here. Why the local work is critical? Well, like I said before, most of the published studies regarding water cycles are in the Pacific Northwest in a very wet climate. They come out of OSU, Oregon State University, and paired watershed studies. They have no relevance here. Okay, so all the studies will tell you that if you cut vegetation, and you pretty much cut it to nothing, you might get somewhere around 10%, 2 to 10% increase in water yields. We're seeing 3 to 4 times that in the Sierra Nevada study because it's in Mediterranean climate. And that's why it's so much needed here, so we can understand our hydrologic balance in the Siskiyou Mountains. It's necessary to quantify the amount and timing of water available for the stream flow and groundwater recharge. This piece right here is critical to understanding the function of the watershed. So far, every study pretty much that Dan talked about is all focused on restricting the end of the faucet. I want to know what's coming in. Okay? I want to know what's coming in. I want to know what's changed and how we might affect the total quantity moving through the system rather than just restricting the use on the other end. The studies in Scott, and that's what this gets about here too, is the studies in the Scott and larger subbasin have been all geared toward that, and all of them are, I find fascinating, are engineering studies. Okay, engineering's great, you know, math is great, but it doesn't give you the biological piece. And we intend to marry the two with this so that we can give a total picture, a total look at this thing. All right. What we do, we examine historic weather back to about 1935, looking at historic precipitation input in the system. We look at how terrain affects precipitation, both in aspect and elevation, and how vegetation would affect that through leaf area index, or the density of leaves above the Earth's surface. We use a measuring device that projects up through the forest canopy and measures the density of chlorophyll above us. Okay, that's how we figure out what the ET is. The effect of all three then are modeled to determine what the timing of the runoff is, based on how that vegetation is affecting snow deposition and storage at the high elevations. And then finally, we use an extrapolation of these normalized models with local data to make it relevant to Scott River. Okay, so we're normalizing this model, not just taking something canned off the shelf and trying to plug it in here because somebody developed it in Colorado. All right, that doesn't work too well either. This one right here, Dan talked about interception, bit of trivia. In Mediterranean climates, snow that falls and is intercepted by trees, you know how much of it goes directly back to the atmosphere? 70%. That's from scientific studies. 70% goes directly to the atmosphere. So in preliminary findings, we've completed phase 1 and 2. I'll show you where you can find that study here in a minute. They comprehensively went through 15 research papers to glean out of them what was directly related to this research. Because if we're going to do research, I insisted that we publish it in a scientific journal and not just be some study that gets stuck on a shelf. Part of that is a thorough review of all research that's been done prior to, where you go through and you methodically go through and say what's relevant, what isn't, and why. That's been done. The forest analysis, forest gap analysis showing fire suppression effect was not significant prior to 1945. You know, the reason that 1945 sticks out in my mind is because 1950 was declared the first effective fire suppression that the agencies had, because the equipment coming back from World War II was retrofitted to work on the land. So that works. New gaps have not been created since 1945, and it leads to a decrease in biodiversity. The small gaps have largely disappeared in our landscape. 1920 mixed conifer and ponderosa pine forest saw stand densities extremely lower than present. Basal areas, the basal area is a wood density measurement per acre, that were concentrated in larger diameter trees, and they were clumped. Okay? They weren't this uniform stuff across the landscape, they were clumped. Greatly affects fire behavior. Photo records revealed dramatic vegetative increases at the lowest and the highest elevations. The mid-elevation densities are similar to what they were before. However, they've been concentrated in younger stems and to a higher percent in true fir. So a shift from pine to true fir. From a tree that demands 30% of its life cycle be under drought stress to one that uses water like there's no tomorrow. East side landscapes have seen an explosion of juniper and brush dominate the landscape, looking at the photos that we have. And most of this juniper and the trees on the east side of Scott Valley were once confined to north slopes and deep drainages by fire and grazing and those things on the landscape. But now, if you look at, there's a direct correlation with a letter that came out from the Forest Service in 1934 that ordered all ranchers to stop burning on the Klamath National Forest. And shortly thereafter, there was an explosion of juniper across the landscape. in the photos.
How about that?
Yeah. All right. There's a couple more. Historic fire severity indicates that the upper slopes, ridge tops, and south and west facing slopes experienced more severe fires between 1850 and 1950 than in the lower and north facing slopes. And that's still true today in the Klamath Mountains. Current fire frequency of about 16 years has not seen gaps in that interval for the past 300 years. We've been about 300 years and it's been 16 years. 16-year interval. It also happens to coincide with the dead component that grows in Manzanita, because it takes between 10 and 15 years to grow that before a fire will go through it. So there are other things that I studied, you know, as a veg guy, that all this kind of gels pretty good. Historic densities are extremely lower than the present. Data suggests a fourfold increase in basal area in general. Western Klamath has seen a drop of 30% of its hardwoods since 1934 from the Wieslander research. We've lost 30% of our hardwoods. And then regression analysis down here has been complete with phase 1 and 2 for all the known data sets that will be used in the model. And that's really important. We're starting from the very beginning designing statistically where to go with the data we have, and we've already identified where we might have knowledge gaps or data gaps that we're going to have to do some modeling to fill in the gaps on that. And I'll let the big heads figure that one out. I had three-quarters of statistics in college, and believe me, it's gone. Forest composition changes. That's what phase 3 and 4 is all about. Study focus, it'll look at 3 critical reference conditions. We'll model the reference historic condition, 1940, because that's what we have photo records for, and that's how we can actually piece together the existing data with a visual display of what's happened in the landscape. We're going to look at the current condition and be able to see what's diminished or increased. I can guarantee it's diminished over time. And then we're going to go into the future 50 years or so to figure out where we're going to be if we continue down the path of the current type of forest management we're doing, and what that means to stream flows. So the plan for 3 and 4, we need to take more field measurements on a 100 by 100 meter grid. Field measurements to calibrate the model, analysis of all of the data. In other words, we have to take the statistical stuff and we have to convert it to a form that will feed into the model. The hydrologic modeling and assessment then will take place for the reference conditions, and then the study will be published in a scientific journal when we get done with this. Expected results, we get estimates in the changes in water storage, evapotranspiration, stream flow in Sugar Creek. We'll run simulations for different weather conditions. You know, everybody said, what about climate change? Okay, we'll model that. You know, we'll take some trends and look at where we might be with this weather scenario and that weather scenario, you know, 50 years in the future. And then estimates and simulations are based on this rigorous analysis of the data, the spatially explicit, process-based model itself, and then model structure and parameters that are verified for comparable areas. We can take then Sugar Creek as the guinea pig, so to speak, and expand it for the watershed then. So we'll have a reference condition by vegetative type, by elevation, by aspect, that we can apply then to the rest of the basin, the water basin, and figure out what the true water loss has been for Scott River. The objectives here in the field measurements are to measure forest structure and composition, stem density, basal area, and then develop the canopy metrics for modeling. Quicker. And I had to throw a current fire photo in. Just a lead in here, hydrology, historic fire and forest resilience. Just quickly, if you bear with me, I want to bring in something that's really relevant here that we'll use in our study. And it's Eric Knapp's research that he's currently involved in the Sierra. That's real applicable. This is the White's Gulch fire from the Eddy Gulch Lookout a week ago. It's since burned up to the lookout. So, forest resilience, that's what I'm after. You can't stop, we can't stop fires. Fires are a natural part of our ecosystem, but what we can stop is their impact with some forest management. So we're interested in increasing forest resilience. And some of those things that are giving us fits of the stressors are increased fire severity. You can see it along this line right here. From 1992 to present, we've been on a steady incline in severity from the forest fires we see in California. Much greater increase than we saw historically. And then, of course, that's related to drought stress and forest density associated with that line right there. Are there implications? Yeah, there are. Restoration looks like this and this and then this. How much we do is up to society. I want to touch quickly on Duncan Dunning, foresters in the room if there are any. You remember Duncan Dunning developed a site classification system for trees, tree growth. Well, he also did some other things that I didn't know about until recently. One is he put these plots in the Sierra Nevada where he surveyed with a surveying a theodolite, engineering theodolite, exactly every point where there was a tree, a bush, a log, and everything else on these plots. Eric Knapp has picked up this research and he's duplicated them today. And what is the difference between 1929 and 2008 on those plots? Trees per acre has gone from 116 in 1929 to 276 trees per acre currently on those plots. The basal area has gone from 237 square feet to 304, and percent pine has gone from 37% down to 21. To a forester, those are glaring numbers. You know, I know you're probably rolling around in your head right now, but those are dramatic changes in our landscape with dramatic effect associated with that. Here's above looking down at density, 1929 here, and what that spatial arrangement looks like today. It's not too hard to figure out. The fire moving through a landscape has to drop to the ground once in a while over here. It doesn't over here. And I always marvel at the things I got away with in my youth fighting fire that you would never get away with today. It was because of that changed condition right there. So in 1929 we had this. Today we have this on the landscape. And restoration looks like going from this back to something like that if we're doing the full suite of restoration. It benefits both the water yield and the fire resiliency in the landscape. It can look like this. Those of you familiar with the Eddy project that I did, rather than looking at an individual acre and looking at that spatial arrangement in that last one, this was Eddy project where we modeled fire behavior in the landscape and looked at variable densities. Lower third of the slope, much higher density of timber there because the humidities are higher, fire behavior doesn't behave the way it does. But as you come up the hill, and you get the explosive fire behavior, it requires much less density at the upper pieces of those watersheds. What's that do? It packs snow. Okay, so the hydrologic model and the fire model, it couldn't come together better from my research on this. And then the status. Phase 1 and 2 documents are complete, and the report can be downloaded on this website right here. It's just, there you go. Sorry. Nervous breakdown. I'm just magic with computers. So it's on the CaliforniaResourceCenter.org webpage. Under the tab that's Sugar Creek Water Yield. And if you go there, you can find the PDF version of the 100 and whatever page phase one, and it'll, believe me, it'll take you longer to get through it than it took me to go through it. If you read it. We're currently securing additional funding to complete phase 3 and 4 through some current California DWR grant processes, and we have a meeting on the 12th of September as the next gate to jump through. In round figures, the next part of the research phase is expensive. We're looking at about $185,000 to complete that. Includes about a year's worth of work for 2 PhDs and part-time work for a third out of UC Berkeley that we'll pick up, as well as a field crew to do all the data collection. And I think that's about it. Thank God I'm going to shut up, right? Thanks.
We can have Ray and Dan come up and we can ask them questions at any point of the presentation that you might have had. Ray.
That's a question. True fir, is that like Doug fir or is it?
White fir and red fir.
Fir?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Doug fir's it's a cross, actually a false fir, is what its name implies.
So it doesn't have the water demand that?
No, not near as much as the white fir does. And the root systems are very different. The true fir has a diverse surface root system. Anything that makes it out of the canopy and falls on the ground gets taken up by all the root mass very quickly too, where the ponderous pine is more of a taproot associated with it. It taps deeply into the ground.
Is Doug fir as thirsty as the white fir?
No, in between. Doug fir can tolerate drought much longer than true fir.
But it won't reach the stand densities in the understory.
No.
Not even a fraction.
No, if you know anything about true fir, about the white fir in particular, and at the red fir at the higher elevation, when fire touches it, it's dead. So it really had to retreat historically to north slopes and deep drainages, where now it's just across the landscape, which is abnormal for that tree. And the other thing about it too is it grows as a clone. Kind of like the board, all of the root are interconnected with one another, so one individual really isn't one. It's the community.
Which tree are you talking about?
White fir.
White fir.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't see that. I have a few on my property and I don't see that.
Well, I'm talking about pure white fir stands.
Okay, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's fine.
In fact, if you walk through a white fir stand or a red fir stand, sometimes you'll see a stump that was cut off and it calloused over. It's because it's getting all those nutrients from the trees around it. And again, Dan's subject here, so I'm dangerous in Sylvan's.
Grace?
For your next 2 phases, how long do you think that'll take?
About a year.
About a year,
Yeah.
if you get the money, when you get the money.
When we get the money, yeah. Yeah.
And what can we do to help you get the money?
I don't know.
Okay.
We'll talk.
All right.
Yeah, right now we're leaning on the governor's, what's the process we're working on with DWS?
There's several.
It's the drought emergency money. And this would fit right into that if we just convince them they want to come into our category.
Is that through Irwin, through the North Coast Irwin?
No, it's through DWR.
Have you approached the Irwin?
No.
Not yet.
Okay, we have another round of funding from the Irwin coming up soon.
Okay.
Yeah. This might really fit into that well.
Okay.
Okay.
So someone right here and then Bob after here.
If we were indeed able to, at some point in the future, be able to do like thinning practices and creating more open space and reducing the amount of true fir and things that we've talked about here, would that mean more roads being put in or are not necessarily?
I don't think so. Dan can probably speak to that. better than I. Certainly from a private land, no. Yeah, where we don't have roads, we can use helicopter. There's ways to do it for those.
Really, you know, we're looking at managing areas that are, you know, already accessible right now. I think that's the primary focus.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that for Scott River specifically, the highest elevations are actually in wilderness. So we have to look at managed natural fire or prescribed fire to get to where we want to be in those land allocations.
Can you turn that into acres? How many acres is in Klamath National Forest?
Yeah, 1.7 million acres.
Last couple of years, it seems like we're pretty much on that pace of it.
Yeah, the problem is we're burning the wrong places. Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the effect on your new idea of wildlife.
Oh, you mean with the legislation I wrote?
Yeah.
Okay. My other hat is I work on legislation with the Natural Resource Committee of the House. And one of the things I wrote last year was a way to manage endangered species on a dynamic scale by watershed, which allows, if you have a certain requirement, a certain percentage of habitat required by number of acres in a sub-watershed, then it doesn't matter whether it's here or it's over here. It just matters that it's there over a period of time. So the legislation I wrote takes what was 1960s science that went into the Endangered Species Act and moves it forward, knowing what we know about forest ecology, and allows like an agency to manage on a watershed scale those habitats with these dynamic changes that we see with fires and other disturbances. Because what we do right now is we statically lock in a landscape and try and hold it that way forever, and you see what happens.
Yeah.
You just can't do that. Nature, they don't function that way. Nature doesn't work that way. Yeah.
In your field studies, do you look very much at grasses and shrubs, or is it mostly just the trees? I wasn't clear.
Yeah, it's all woody material, so not the grasses.
Okay.
Grasses are actually the perfect medium for infiltration.
Yes.
We'd love to see more grass. It prevents erosion and gets the most water into the ground mantle. But anything aerially, from man's need on up, is what's measured.
Brian?
I hate to ask you about conclusions since you're still at phase 1 and 2, but
Yeah.
I noticed you talked about large open spaces very large open spaces starting to be detrimental in a high snow environment because you get early snow melt, and
Yeah.
obviously that's not a good thing. We want late snow melt. Where the rain-snow mix is different at lower elevations, say 3,000 feet more in an oak woodland transitioning into a conifer pine type area, where you're getting, not the kind of snow you get maybe up in Sugar Creek. Does that suggest that larger open spaces and more grasses, infiltrated grasses like you just talked about, is the model to try to keep our livestock springs going in those sorts of things?
Yeah, the biggest, I guess the biggest punch is in the snow zone above, I think it's 5,500 feet. If that's clear, that's the best infiltration we can have for groundwater. Those are the ones that saw the highest severity fire as well historically at our ridge tops, but those are the ones that are most affected dramatically by fire suppression. So those have to be restored to get any kind of function back in the groundwater recharge. The rain on snow zone, the intermediate piece below that, big clear cuts don't do much good, because what you do end up packing snow in a large clear cut ends up melting quicker because of its higher solar exposure. So if you mimic the fire regime, which was 2 to 7 acre openings, it's perfect. And that's known in forestry as a group selection.
Even in those lower elevations?
Even in those lower elevations, because what you get is you get sufficient shading to to protect the snow from early melt, but you get snow accumulation that you wouldn't get if the gaps were not there.
And when it comes to the tree selections in those areas, which are a little different, we're not looking at the white pine, or the white fir and the red fir, but looking more at a juniper, oak, Doug, ponderosa, what species should we be selecting for lower water consumption?
Well-
Obviously, every juniper in the world should go, but.
Yeah, you know, it depends on aspects. You know, is it north, is it south, is it east, is it west? You know, certainly on the north aspect, the sugar pines and Doug firs are going to be a heavier component naturally. And I've always been a forester who likes to use what God gave me, basically, not force something on the landscape. And so I would gravitate toward, regardless of what the model shows, I would gravitate toward lower densities of those species that should be present on that aspect. As you come around to the south, west, and east-facing slopes with much higher components of pine, ponderosa pine, and then sugar pine and then Doug fir, the third.
And hardwood component.
Yeah, the hardwood. And you know, the lowest elevation stuff, truthfully, why am I so interested in that? Mainly from a large ungulate perspective, and looking at wintering deer herds and wintering elk herds. Fire suppression in there probably has a greater effect on their foliage than it does much on the hydrologic change that we can make down there.
Angelina back here, and then we'll come back up.
I have 3 quick questions.
That's Dan.
Is the Sugar Creek, Mediterranean climate in the Sugar Creek similar and indicative to the drainages of the Upper Sac? And can this research project be transferred to conditions in the Upper Sac?
In general, yes.
You know, it's maybe more moisture in the Upper Sac, and
Yeah.
then you're getting more summer moisture in the Upper Sac area too. So, you know, close, but.
Depends where you're at.
Yeah, right, yeah, right.
Okay.
You know, as you notice, as you come up Interstate 5 toward Mount Shasta, the lower end of that, certainly from probably, you know, that's where I used to work in my youth. You look at, let's say, probably down from between Dog Creek and coming up to, what's that, Sims. You know, it would certainly apply there. Once you get above that, you've got a rain belt in there all the way till you hit the crest, which would have much higher moisture, similar to Happy Camp in the west. Yeah, so, you know, one size fits all doesn't work in forestry.
Okay. And then in the boulevard lookout slide,
Yeah.
was the difference in that landscape primarily because of fire suppression, or was it also forest harvest practices?
Both,
Okay.
yeah.
And then you mentioned for the phase 3 and 4 that the research projects would be occurring mostly on private lands. I was just
Well,
curious why.
the manipulation piece would be. So we'll get through 3 and 4 with the model predictions that we had, and then we'll go test them in phase 5.
Oh, okay.
That'll happen on private land
And why private over public land?
because of the legal encumbrances, the differences between private land and public land. We have to be able to get through a predictable period of time with implementation, and we just, sorry, Dan, can't count on getting through that with the public process.
Okay.
First of all, assuming you were able to secure funding for all the remaining phases,
Mhm.
how long are we looking at for this to be completed to the point of publishing the papers and maybe having recommendations? And I'm assuming, I mean, I'm listening to this, and I know what you're doing is specific to this area, but there are some overarching principles I'm
Sure.
saying, you know, which is, you know, maybe returning an area to its more natural tree composition, structure composition, and things like that, where, I mean, can you see this actually being adopted statewide at some point? I mean,
Funny you
it's-
should ask. Actually, Roger Bales is building a network for California of these experimental plots, so that hydrologists can better predict what California's water supply is. And so this would go into a statewide network as a research station.
And how long do you see this all taking?
We need about 2 to 3 months to do the field data, and then about another 8 months to do the in-house, in the lab manipulation and publishing. It's about a year.
And then phase 5, how long of a time is it?
That could stretch out for years.
Yeah, establishing some sort of baseline,
Yeah.
with the flows and that type of thing.
Yeah.
And then implementation could be years, like you said.
Yeah, and in phase 5, we want to go in and we want to put accurate stream monitoring stations in, and, and look at water yield, and probably need to put some, I forget what those things are,
Soil monitoring.
the soil, yeah, I forget the name of the things, but the soil monitors that actually are calibrated to pick up the moisture that does fall specifically on that point.
Yeah, I mean, we need to understand that, this hydraulic model could tell us that, if you do this, you're gonna get higher flows, but we may decide that that's not what we wanna do.
We may decide, we may decide that we have to manipulate too much to get much of a change.
Yeah. So it's finding out first, from this phase 4, what the opportunities are, and then trying to, decide if that's something we want to take on. I mean,
Yeah.
the private timber industries also, they're looking to make $1, and so they don't want to, take their stocking down below a certain level either.
That's right.
So they have, different restraints that we might not even consider. If we were looking at something that was historical, on the landscape, it might be understocked according to timber vest or something like that. It might be okay for us, because we're not looking at maximizing timber returns also.
It really spurred my interest why I wanted to answer this question beyond working with the watershed councils in my previous job, but in my previous job too, doing consultation work with endangered species. I was always irritated, I guess, that we couldn't look at the things that connect us and the things that connect the ecosystem together, one of them being water. And it always seemed to me that owl requirements were at odds with fish. Because you can't have extremely dense forests and have flowing streams. And then again, I don't want to play God, but all I'm saying is it was just a glaring dysfunction in my head, trying to work through these issues on public land.
Any other questions?
I was late, so you may have already addressed this, but when we have smoke like this, the river seems to flow better afterwards.
Yeah.
That's, I assume, a reduction in ET. Is it the reduction in ET in riparian vegetation, or is it the forest as a whole?
Good question, Steve.
Well, I can tell you.
Yeah, and shade reduces the ET, I would guess that's.
Well, temperatures are
Reduction
depressed. Temperatures are depressed. In the Hancock fire that went on for 6 months in Woolly Creek in 2006, we depressed the temperatures 6 degrees in the stream during that summer period from normal. But if you'll notice, the prolonged smoke and lack of photosynthesis is already shutting down the oaks. If you drive around, the oak trees are losing their leaves. So with that, they're stopping their use of water right now. And anecdotally, I would say, you're right. Smoke is shutting down those plants, and we may see a little bit of rising in the streams after that.
And definitely lower temperatures. I mean, those are measured, right, Bill? I mean, you found that up there? I mean, on your forest too?
Yeah, in fact, there's been at least 1 year where there's been a threat of a lower Klamath fish kill just a few years ago, where there was enough smoke in the lower Klamath where it may have contributed more to keeping the lower Klamath temperatures cooler than the amount of water that the Bureau Rec was producing.
Okay, any other questions? All right. Well, I guess we get to end off a little early then. I do want to remind everyone, our next workshop is on climate change in Siskiyou County, just looking at what the impacts that we might be expecting to see or already are seeing are. That will be on the 10th. Feel free to pick up a flyer if you want. We also have our brochures for the rest of the workshops we'll be putting on for the rest of this fall. I want to give a big thanks to Ray and Dan again for presenting today and passing on their knowledge. I hope you learned something. I know I did. And I want to wish you a good night.
Let's give them a hand.